My name is Tariq BASRAOui. I am the Director of Community Marketing at Zencastr. I'm super excited to be a part of this conversation. Obviously, having Arab heritage, being from, my father is from Morocco, the idea of how we can enable all Arab podcasters and podcasters in general around the world is near and dear to my heart. And the initiatives that I think that Podlines are working on are really first class. So super excited to be here and give some of our insight, and then hopefully answer any questions there may be, and take this conversation further. I think the best part about podcasting is it doesn't have to end. This is not a full stop. This is just our first episode, our first recording. So I will talk a little bit about Zencastr. So I think that this slide really kind of demonstrates the issue that the anonymous question was after. Creating a successful podcast today is an absolute nightmare when it comes to all of these different things. I think the question asked was why, can we talk about starting a podcast, and if it's an easy process or not? I think we would both totally agree with the questionnaire that it is quite hard. And if we've misrepresented it, I think that is only because we've both seen the fruits of those labors and understood that when you take action in this way, beautiful thing through a podcast, but you have to stay with it. And so I'll talk a little bit about this. Let's just talk about the 14 steps to podcasting. You have to prepare for your podcast. So we need to figure out, what is my podcast about? Okay, let's just say creating an episode, not even the entire podcast. I have to prepare by understanding who you are, who I'm going to talk to. What are we going to talk about? What are the questions that I should prepare to ask you? That's literally just the first 2 steps. And we all know that there's many communications that are happening during that time. You have the conference call. So are we using a link like Calendly? Are we automating it to save ourselves time? Which tool are we using? Are we using a tool like Zencastr? Are you using Skype? Are you using Zoom? Are you using Squadcast? There's a choice right there, and that's a technical choice. This is an issue that's not simply solved as like Zencastr is better because of this, and this. Sure, but some people have usability issues. I can only get my guest on Zoom, for example, because they need to join via mobile, and it has to be one click, and they don't have the technology to download it. There's so many different ways to differentiate yourself, but also have a stumbling block. And we've only gotten to the conference call section of just choosing which technology. Recording the call and the quality thereafter is something that will affect the quality of your podcast in general. As we both know, even in the beginning of this, excuse me, I had to switch off of my mic and off of my headphones because of a connection issue with Hopin. That's something that happens technically in many podcasts on every platform. That's something that A, cannot be avoided, but B, think about how far we have come in the last 100 years in terms of communication and how much further we will go. Now, let's think about, okay, we're actually in the podcast. We are recording the podcast right now. Let's say our session right now has been recorded. This is a podcast episode if we'd like it. But now someone has to go back and understand the times that me and you said something of value. How do I mark those out? How do I figure out what are the quotes that Podlines can share on social media after to start promoting this event and promoting this recording? We have to edit the audio. So if me and you dropped out at different points, we had a video connection issue, etc. All of those things would affect each of these editing sections in 7 and 8. And last but not least, let's think about like the usability or accessibility. Hosting, where you choose to host your podcast, is a choice made both financially as well as distribution. Obviously, you want to have a place for people to go to listen to your show, but you also need to be on all of the biggest apps that are, where people listen to music or listen to podcasts. So that's a choice that I think many podcasters are not even educated in making when you're starting a podcast. And it's trial and error where, for lack of a better word, how many times a week do I see someone tag at Zencastr and at Squadcast? What are the 2 or 3 ways? What are the 2 or 3 ways I can do this in podcasting? Whatever that X is, because there are so many different questions. And then other peers pop in and say, hey, I think Zencastr is good for this. I think Anchor is good for that. And I think I want to stream blah, 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 blah. And then I create clips with, Illustrator. There's so many nuanced discussions to have. As you said, we are running much more than a podcast when you're a podcaster. You are running a digital media business. You're trying to understand how to gain traction, much in the same way that a SaaS company would. And so then we'll get to the parts that I'm super, super passionate about. Is I think that creating promos of your podcast, using video and audio and using audiograms is just beginning. Like, we're so close to really beautiful things happening. I'm glad to say Zencastr will make solutions very soon that I think they're going to change the game for these last few, which are extremely important. Creating promotional content for your podcast that is SEO friendly, that is clickable. Like I said, it's a sizzle reel. I look at content, all the time, and it is so clear to me who has had some production experience and who has not, because you might be pulling out a great quote from our conversation, but the first 3 seconds need to be that good to get you excited about listening to the rest of what we have to say. And then the distribution part, when you think about it for social media, like I said, there's tools I would recommend for different podcasters. Sprout is something that we use at Zencastr. There are many tools that do the same thing in terms of I can auto post X, Y, and Z, use AI for optimal times. But it's hard, and you don't know to do any of these things. The reason I know how to use Sprout is because I've managed $1 million paid social media campaigns. If you haven't done that, like, how would you have the experience to choose the right platform? You won't. And so unless you get it through word of mouth, you're going to end up making errors. And like we talked about, it's that last 5 to 10% that's most important. You want to make A+ work, because A+ work is the only way that you're going to get seen and heard. And then I think most important, let's look at the numbers at the bottom. 6 hours to publish a single episode. I think that's undervaluing it. 6 real hours, not 6 total hours, 6 like minutes. 6 hours in every single minute of those 6 hours doing stuff to try and get this podcast closed. I mentioned earlier, some of the bigger creators that I'm working with to promote on Zencastr, they have teams of 7 to 15 people. And these are not massive influencers yet. We're talking 500,000 to 1 million on each platform. No, that's very big. They will make lots of money, irregardless of whether they have a. But it is mind-boggling to think that you would need a 7 to 10 person team to create something like this. And it's a huge burden on the aspiring podcaster, which is, I know the point of this entire convention and conversation is to understand, A, to illuminate the issues with podcasting, and B, to discuss the solutions that are coming, because there are, and the initiatives that Podlines are launching, your tool as well as our tool. These are all things that I want to enunciate to creators. The reason we're building this is to save you time. This 6 hours to publish a single episode is it's just not acceptable as far as I'm concerned. It's not sustainable. It's just not a good way to mature a different market or an audience. The expenses, if I'm 15 years old, I can't afford $190. And that's 15 years old in America with a good, well-income family. Now, that doesn't even answer how we get podcasting tools and podcasts live in third world countries and people who are of lesser financial means. So there's a threshold there that needs to be changed. Anchor did a great job, and it's the reason that they came on so fast and were purchased by Spotify, was that they lowered the threshold to free. The problem with Anchor is that it just didn't mature in the way we talked about earlier about platforms. There are statistics that will speak to this. It's not my opinion. There of the 2 or 3 million podcasts that were eventually launched on Anchor, for lack of a better word, it's something like 85% that never got past episode 3. Those are not podcasts. And so with Zencastr, we talk about it specifically. I often say it because I want to illustrate to people, 10% of active podcasts are made on Zencastr. So that it's a tool that's been around for 5 years and has weathered those storms of how we've, as podcasting matures, and yet it matures alongside. We added video, we've added AI tools around face cropping and audio synthesization. All these things are literally done so that maybe it'll be easier for you to edit the audio. Maybe you can get clips out of your video feed much quicker than you would if you had to hire someone to do it, or learn how to do it in iMovie or something else like that. And last but not least, and I'll talk about this specifically from our point of view, we launched a podcast to try and understand this ecosystem at the same time as trying to tell our story. That that podcast, and this is coming with Zencastr, we have an email list that ends in the hundreds of thousands. We have web visitors in the hundreds of thousands per month. So we have the capabilities, you know what I'm saying, to go out and get an audience. And yet our podcast did something like 1,000 or 500 listens each episode. And we had audiograms. We had guests on. We were telling the story of Zencastr, which may not be known to everyone, but to people who use Zencastr, it's like a cult following kind of thing. This is the tool that helps me do my podcast. That's really important. And so we switch over and look at our podcast. We put out 7 episodes in our first season. We really detail how Josh and his wife moved around the world. Zencastr, for everyone's notice, is a totally remote company, has always been. And so it's really a unique story around who we are and how we got here. And you get to meet the different staff members, and so as well as some of our Zencastr OGs, as I like to call them, people who have been with us from the beginning and are invaluable. These are the people that made Zencastr what it is alongside our staff, because their feedback and the way that they have worked with us in order to build a better platform for themselves is getting better and better for everyone. So it's really, really interesting. And I bring this up to point out, yes, we have all of that leverage, and yet we have 7 ratings. Great. Yeah. They're all 5 stars, but we have 7 ratings. Like this is, and another podcaster I'm working with has 500,000 followers. Just as an anecdote, I go to her Libsyn account to see where her podcast is hosted. She has 0 comments on every single episode.
Wow.
This is, Mia, you and I know from a social media point of view, that's just unacceptable. There is not a mature YouTube of podcasts yet. There is no platform that helps you do that. So I think there is just so much to learn coming soon. And I really want to illustrate that is, I think that Zencastr, along with a couple other tools, are just so well positioned when it comes to how do we cut these corners for creators? How do we make it easier to podcast? Because as the question asked, like in my long-winded answer, the truth is it's really hard. It's really, really hard. And it's on me and you to come up with solutions to make it easier for you guys. Yeah, so as you can see, so passionate. There's my rant for the day.
No, I completely agree. I think I personally feel, I don't know. I mean, YouTube took off because there was a lot of, there was a social angle. Like even on TikTok, the For You page has comments, right? Like there's obviously a commenting system and moderation built out there. There's YouTube, which has, a lot of funny comments. And YouTube comments is a meme in and of itself. Yeah.
YouTube comments are fantastic.
There's so fantastic. Many comments. Yeah. So they actually built out that whole thing. So I think, I don't know, maybe YouTube will be the YouTube for podcasts. Maybe, I don't know. But yeah, it's just very interesting. Like after TikTok got banned, I'm from India, by the way. After TikTok got banned in India, 2 things happened. Instagram Reels just exploded, and YouTube Shorts also exploded, but not in the same way that Instagram Reels did. And both have fascinating comment sections, in that sense. Like, and also like they have amazing algorithms pushing out the content to recommended, right? Like both have amazing AI algorithms in their feeds. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe what's missing is a proper For You page type algorithm for podcasts, right? Like really understands you and then gives you bites, and it syncs with all the. I know I'm just like spitballing here, but
no, I think you're very right. We lack, even though podcasting is such a strong community. You can see it if you go to podcasters of Instagram. If you're on Twitter and you ask a question as a podcaster, other people will respond if you do a hashtag. And yet we're so disparate. We're spread out across so many different regions, physically, time zones. The way that we can connect, whether it is I have an iPhone and therefore I can record via Zoom, or I have a MacBook and therefore I can record via Zencastr. There's so many different ways is affected by the technology and affected by the community. And I would put the hypothesis and the question as to like, why hasn't that happened?
Yeah,
there are many smart people at many big companies that have funded that question already. Why hasn't podcasting as a community matured in one place as opposed to matured in many different places? And that's not to say they're mutually exclusive. It's a question of like how do we aggregate and disseminate? Because as you said, like if a country decides that they are going to ban one technology. That instantly, pushes Instagram and YouTube, that movies them instantly. They are now worth, Zencastr, for example, as well. We're remote recording. We saw 300x increase when the pandemic started. Of course, because people now understood I need to have video and I need to, communicate with people. It's so close. Like I said earlier, like we are so close to that growth.
I have a hunch here. I think I know why it's not happened yet. There's always some pieces of content that really give you like a huge amount of engagement. Like on YouTube, I remember like this whole thing initially, people are posting a lot of videos, funny videos of their cats, like cute kittens and all of that. We need to find one like clickbaity use case that has a very wide appeal. Maybe it's just, like, I don't know, maybe it's the video, right? Like Instagram Reels also exploded with the video and the dub, and like even like TikTok used to be called Musically before, and they allowed you to dub stuff over this. So video was an element, audio was an element. So I don't know, maybe it's the video that really creates virality, because with video you'll have these amazing users. Like, I like cats. Like everyone likes cats. So I mean, if there's a cat doing something funny, like punching a baby, like that's one of the most popular videos. Like I still get a lot of recommended cat punches baby videos. It's so funny. I still watch it. Like, it's just 10 seconds. YouTube algorithm understands me, and it will always show me whenever I open YouTube. It'll show me as recommended. Hey, you want to watch this? It's like, and it's 10 seconds. It's funny.
The power of AI and persuasion. To bring it back to what we were talking about earlier.
Powered by great 10-second clickbaity content. So I'm just saying, like, maybe podcast as a medium hasn't found its cat punching baby moment. It's a very crass way of putting it, but like some piece of content that has a very wide appeal, and it's funny. It's got some sense of humor or something like that. Maybe.
I would have to agree, and I see a couple of the guys from Squadcaster in the chat as well. They and us at Zencastr are doing the same thing in terms of video, and I couldn't agree more, because I think that having seen what I saw at TikTok and understanding why these models work, why they do, really changes the way that you present something. And so I would say with podcasting, and it's a balancing. We don't want to bastardize the content, because I believe it's art. But at the same time, how do I show off complicated long format art in a way that is engaging and acceptable and accessible across platforms? Not only, if there's that, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Instagram, etc. Just like you said, when we go back to 2012 Instagram, we are talking about when it was just photos and there were 5 editing tools. There are now a multitude. If you look at the toolbox that you are given by Instagram. And I would say the same thing is going to happen for podcasting. I know both us and Squadcast have added more guests, higher functionalities when it comes to Wave, higher quality video while you're doing it, in addition to the recording obviously being in 1080, and adding more guests every time. Sure, that's not so useful for something like this, but it could be much more useful for someone else in a different application. It's so interesting to think how far podcasting has come to bring it back, and yet how far we still have to go. How we incorporate more voices that are underrepresented, how we enable them to be successful podcasters through our platforms. It's an endless rabbit hole that we have to solve. That's great, because this is like we talked about, like this is why we're in technology. It's mad fun. It's really fun to do this.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I was actually reading this really fascinating book recently. It was called Carlota Perez's, I don't remember the exact name, Technological Revolutions and Financial Capital, something like that. It's by a professor in some university in Chile or something in South America. And she was talking about these waves of technology, like there's a bubble phase, like with the hype cycle, and then there's like the trough of inflated expectations, and then there's the final deployment age. So every technology has to go through that hype cycle, right? And within the first, it's a rite of passage. Like nothing in this world that has become huge has gone through that. So I think podcasting is in that phase right now, where it's just a lot of people were expecting it to grow exponentially, like in an S curve, but that's not happened. It's still at the bottom of the inflated expectations curve, and maybe it'll get deployed at some, like at a reasonable level.
I use
So
the same example for social media, where I say that I don't judge at least Zencasters in terms of our highs. It's much more about my consistent low. Because I understand as we acquire audience, as I partner with podcasters who have 1 million reach, of course, I'm going to get 100,000 impressions on the tweet. That's not unique. That's not sustainable. We're talking about, the hit or miss when I think I said it earlier, you fly too close to the sun, as opposed to how do I consistently build bricks around my house? How do I fertilize my garden so that all of these fruits and tomatoes, they will ripen and grow at the right time? It's so interesting to think how we have to teach people to do this, because like you said, the only way I know that about social media is because I've done it for 10 years.
Yeah.
The only way you understand that is because how does a sales software work is because you've done sales and understanding what are the pitfalls. How do I, for lack of a better word, build a bridge? Build a bridge so that people can go across it. And I told the bridge because that's my technology, but I can tell you for a fact, other people have great bridges too. At the end of the day, we're just trying to build solutions for audiences.
I completely agree. I think it's very interesting to see how this will evolve. And like, if you look back 5 years later to this conversation, a lot of interesting things would have happened by then. And some would be completely, something that we didn't catch at all. And some would be, okay, like this one thing, maybe we got right here. It's very interesting.
So true. I would imagine 5 years from now, we will know some of the things we said to be completely false, and others of them to be so true that we might as well have been pulling to go back to the Joe Rogan, Elon Musk stuff. Like, we're saying some prophetic things because we've studied it. And what we will see in a couple of years is the things that we constantly debate, because it's where we orient our business and therefore how we make money in the future. Right.
No, completely agree. All right. Thanks, Tariq. This was fascinating. It was really nice to come and talk to you.
Any other questions? I truly have to say, I have to mirror the same thing. Like, podcasting is so close to the exponential growth curve, and that growth curve is going to be a wild ride for every single one of us. And I would encourage everyone who's thinking about joining a podcast or being on a podcast to do it now. Do it now. Be ahead of the curve. Take the leap of faith, for lack of a better word. Invest in yourself, because I have seen enough podcasters to know that this becomes a cult in and of itself. Each and every show, because even if you have 250 people listening to it, if they tune in every week, that means you're talking to someone about something that matters. And great faith in that, and trust your work. I think the hardest part is those first few episodes. Like, just get your process together, work on it, get rid of the things that are hard. Keep it simple and put it out there. Thank you so much to everybody who has joined us.